The rain hammered against the glass as lightning split the New York skyline. Inside a silent penthouse, a young woman stood trembling, torn between pride and desire. A powerful, untouchable to the outside world, took one step closer. His voice, low and rough, broke the silence. If love means I fix you, then it isn't love. Do you still want me, Kemi? Her reply cut through the storm like a blade. I don't want your power. I want you. But what followed this night would ignite scandal, risk reputations, and force them to choose between independence and surrender, truth and survival. Would she walk away or step into a world she never belonged to? Stay with us until the very end. You don't want to miss how this story unfolds. And before we begin, hit subscribe so you never miss our next romance, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. The storm began long before the first drop of rain touched the city. It lingered in the air like static, rattling the bones of New York with a warning no one heeded. By the time night swallowed the skyline, Blackwell Tower stood like a spear of glass, slicing through the low clouds as if daring the heavens to strike. Inside its endless corridors, fluorescent lights hummed over linoleum floors, and Kemi Afolabi pushed her cart through the silence. Her gray uniform clung to her arms, damp from the earlier drizzle, and the handle of her mop burned against the calluses of her palms. She moved like a shadow, efficient, unseen, yet her mind sketched lines of art over every polished surface. Tonight should have been like any other, but unease pressed against her ribs, an invisible weight urging her forward. The elevator doors groaned as she pressed the button to reach the 34th floor. She hated elevators. The stale metallic air, the mirrored panels reflecting a woman she barely recognized. Young but already weathered by too much responsibility. Still, the stairs were worse, and her body was tired from scrubbing offices emptied hours ago by men in suits who never knew her name. The doors slid shut, swallowing her in a box of steel and silence. She tightened her bun, smoothed the wrinkles on her sleeve, and whispered the same words she repeated every night. One day, not this. The cab lurched upward, numbers glowing red in sequence, but halfway through the lights flickered and the machine stilled. Darkness wrapped her like a fist. The air thickened, pressing against her throat. She reached instinctively for the emergency button, but nothing responded. The hum of the city vanished, leaving only her own pulse pounding in her ears. She exhaled sharply, forcing control back into her trembling hands. The storm outside had finally broken through the walls of glass and steel. Thunder cracked, shaking the shaft, and lightning illuminated her reflection in the mirrored panel. Wide eyes, tight jaw, fear refusing to win. Then a voice rose from the shadows, low and steady, carrying authority that didn't belong in the dark. You're not alone in here. Her body stiffened, heart jerking against her chest. She hadn't realized someone else was inside. Her eyes strained to adjust, catching the outline of a tall figure on the opposite side of the cab. The man's voice held no panic, only calm precision, as if he were used to controlling chaos. The power's out. We'll have to wait. Kemi's suspicion sharpened. Men in the city, strangers in the dark, had taught her not to trust easily. She steadied her tone, though her throat felt raw. That's easy for you to say. Some of us don't get paid to sit still. The man chuckled softly, a sound that seemed out of place in the suffocating dark. And what do you get paid to do? Her words cut back, sharper than she intended. To clean the mess left behind by people like you. Silence stretched, broken only by another crack of thunder. She thought she had gone too far, but then his voice returned, quieter now, almost curious. People like me. What does that mean to you? Kemi leaned against the wall, the mop handle still clutched in her grip like a weapon. She wanted to retreat, but something in his tone demanded honesty. It means I scrub your floors while you step over me without seeing. It means you look at glass towers and see empires, while I see fingerprints I have to wipe away. It means I'm invisible, and you, whatever you are, you're the reason. The man shifted in the shadows, and she caught the glint of his watch when lightning flared again. His eyes, pale even in the dark, studied her without flinching. For the first time in years, someone listened without interruption, and that unsettled her more than the storm. He didn't defend himself, didn't dismiss her, only asked one question that lodged deep. And if someone saw you, truly saw you, what then? Her breath caught. She hated how the words struck a hidden nerve. She tightened her jaw, refusing to yield. Then they'd know I'm more than this uniform, more than a cart and a mop. I have dreams that don't fit inside this elevator. He nodded slowly, as if he understood too well. The weight in his voice shifted. Less authority, more confession. Dreams have a way of suffocating when you bury them under expectations. Trust me, I know. The floor trembled as the building shuddered against the storm. She studied him, sensing a contradiction. His posture carried the discipline of someone used to command, yet his words carried loneliness that mirrored her own. Something about him unsettled her balance, but also held her attention. A crackle burst through the intercom, the voice of a security guard breaking the fragile connection. We're working on it. Stay calm. Power should return soon. The man leaned back against the wall, his tone lighter but still edged with curiosity. What's your name? She hesitated, then gave it, steady and clear. Kemi. Kemi Afolabi. The syllables hung in the dark like a declaration. His reply was simple, clipped, revealing nothing. Malcolm. No last name. No title. Just Malcolm. The lights blinked once, then roared back to life, flooding the cab with harsh fluorescence. She blinked against it, vision sharpening, and finally saw him clearly. Broad shoulders under a tailored suit, sharp jawline, eyes that belonged to someone who had never been ignored in his life. Recognition pricked at her. His face was familiar from framed portraits in the lobby. Malcolm Blackwell, the man whose name crowned the tower itself. The doors slid open with a chime, and the storm's roar spilled into the corridor. He didn't move at first, only held her gaze with an intensity that stripped her composure. For a heartbeat, she saw not the Wolf of Wall Street, but a man caught in the same storm she was, trapped in a box where money meant nothing. See you around, Kemi, he said, stepping into the corridor, as if the words were a promise. She remained frozen, gripping her cart, her chest tight with a mix of fear and defiance. She knew what kind of men built towers in the sky, but for the first time, one of them had looked at her and seen more than a uniform. The storm had left its mark on the city, its echo lingering in shattered windows and restless streets. For Kemi, the night trapped in the elevator with Malcolm Blackwell replayed like a half-finished sketch, each detail sharp yet incomplete, daring her to find meaning. Days later, she saw him again, not cloaked in shadows, but bathed in the stark light of the corporate lobby. Malcolm stood amidst assistants and glowing screens, his presence commanding the room. Their eyes met across the marble floor, and in that fleeting moment, recognition cut through the chaos. No words were exchanged, but his gaze held a weight that said he remembered. That evening, Kemi's cleaning shift took her to the executive floor, where glass walls reflected the city's fading light. She pushed her cart into the corner suite, expecting emptiness, but found Malcolm there, alone, framed against an orange skyline. He didn't dismiss her. Instead, he closed his laptop with deliberate care and asked if she'd eaten. The question was so ordinary it felt absurd, yet his eyes carried a sincerity that disarmed her. Against her better judgment, she admitted she hadn't, and he invited her upstairs to his penthouse, offering to cook. The penthouse was a world apart. Polished steel, soft leather, a stark contrast to the bleach-stained corridors of her life. Kemi sat at the kitchen island, watching Malcolm move with unexpected ease, boiling pasta, slicing crusty bread, pouring wine. His shoulders relaxed as he focused on the task, and his voice softened when he asked about her sketches. Hesitant at first, Kemi opened up about her childhood in Lagos, where she'd draw on scraps of paper under flickering streetlights, dreaming of a life beyond survival. Malcolm listened, his eyes steady, and shared his own truth. The empire he'd built had filled his life with power, but left him hollow, isolated by the weight of decisions no one else could understand. His words struck a chord. Passion is never wasted, he said, when she confessed her sketches were for no one but herself. The statement landed like a vow, piercing her defenses. As he slid a glass of wine across the counter, his hand brushed hers, sending a jolt through her. She blamed the wine, but the truth was undeniable. She felt seen. Their conversation deepened, and when his gaze lingered, intense yet unguarded, she couldn't look away. He admitted the loneliness of his world, where power-filled rooms starved the soul. Kemi leaned closer, her voice soft but unguarded. You don't need rescuing, but maybe you need remembering. His eyes darkened, and when he kissed her, it was cautious, reverent, as if she were the first real thing he'd touched in years. What followed was a blur of warmth and choice. Kemi's body trembled under his, but every moment was her own, driven by desire, not necessity. She whispered truths about her fears, her dreams, that made him pause, and he answered with a gentleness that erased her doubts. They moved together through the night, each touch a defiance of the world waiting outside. By dawn, as gold streaked the sky, Kemi knew her life had shifted irrevocably, but the world was relentless. By noon, grainy photos surfaced online. Kemi stepping into Malcolm's car during the storm, their silhouettes visible through terrace windows the night before. Tabloids spun a vicious narrative. The cleaner who seduced the CEO, a tale of favoritism and blurred lines. Headlines screamed of abuse of power, twisting their night into something sordid. At work, whispers trailed Kemi like shadows. Colleagues avoided her, some with pity, others with envy. Her supervisor, face blank, handed her a termination notice, explaining the night cleaning contract had been cut by the CFO. A pragmatic move, nothing personal. The loss of her job, her shield of invisibility, stung like a betrayal. Malcolm called, his voice thick with fury, vowing to fix it all with a single command. Kemi's response was steel. If love means you fix me, we don't have love. He argued, but she held firm, her voice cracking yet resolute. She refused to be another piece in his polished world, a problem solved by his power. If their connection meant anything, it had to survive beyond his control. For Malcolm, the fallout was swift. Board members questioned his judgment, investors whispered doubts, and headlines bled across the lobby screens. Yet the image that haunted him was Kemi in his doorway, eyes blazing with defiance, choosing pride over his protection. He realized power could silence critics, but not truth. Kemi walked home, sketchbook clutched tight, the city's noise louder, its stares sharper. Yet within her burned the echo of his words, the warmth of his touch, and the certainty of her own worth. The storm that trapped them in an elevator had shattered the walls of her life. Amid the scandal's wreckage, she felt a flicker of freedom. She would rebuild, not as a victim or a scandal, but as herself. The photographs didn't fade. They multiplied, spreading like wildfire across every screen in the city. Tabloids plastered Kemi and Malcolm's images beside venomous headlines. Billionaire's cleaner affair rocks, Blackwell empire. Words like favoritism, scandal, and ethics violation screamed in bold, framing their fleeting moments as a sordid transaction. To the public, it wasn't love. It was power preying on innocence. Kemi felt the weight with every step outside her apartment. Each glance from strangers, a mix of curiosity and disdain. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, friends urging caution, unknown numbers prying for gossip. She silenced it, but the city's whispers followed her like a shadow. At Blackwell Tower, Malcolm faced a different storm. The boardroom, once his stronghold, had become a tribunal. 12 faces, polished as the mahogany table, stared at him with calculated skepticism. Lawrence, the CFO, led the charge, his presentation a fortress of numbers. Contracts slashed, budgets tightened, all to weather the scandal's fallout. Your personal choices threaten corporate stability, he said, voice cold as steel. Tokyo's pulling back. Munich's wavering. Investors are spooked. The board nodded, their silence louder than words. Miranda Wells, head of investor relations, leaned forward, her tone sharp. Perception is our reality. The narrative says you've blurred philanthropy with indulgence. If we don't act, this company bleeds. Malcolm's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice even, masking the fury beneath. He reminded them that the decision to cut the cleaning contract, Kemi's lifeline, had been made without his consent, a pragmatic move that cost livelihoods. The board shifted uncomfortably, but Miranda pressed harder. Distance and deny, she urged. Publicly separate yourself from her, or the Tokyo deal collapses entirely. The implication was clear. One woman's place in his life could unravel his empire. He wanted to slam the table, to shout that their spreadsheets couldn't measure the truth in Kemi's eyes that night in the elevator. Her defiance when she refused his help. But rage was a weak shield. I'll handle it, he said, voice final, though doubt lingered in the room's heavy air. Outside, the city churned with judgment. Screens in Blackwell Tower's lobby looped the same headlines, each one a jab at Malcolm's legacy. The Tokyo partnership, a cornerstone of his expansion, formally withdrew that afternoon, citing instability in leadership. Munich sent a cautious email, delaying their commitment. His reputation, built over decades, teetered on the edge of ruin. Yet the image that haunted him wasn't the red ink on Lawrence's charts. It was Kemi, standing in his penthouse doorway, her pride fiercer than any storm. Kemi, meanwhile, packed her life into a battered suitcase. Her apartment, still scarred from the flood, was deemed uninhabitable. Walls stained, ceiling leaking, her sketches warped by dampness. Her books, their pages curling, lay scattered among buckets, catching drips. Each loss stung, a reminder of how fragile her stability had been. With nowhere to go, she dragged her suitcase to a friend's couch in Brooklyn, the air outside thick with mold and rain-soaked asphalt. She clutched her sketchbook, its edges frayed but its pages still hers, a tether to the self she refused to lose. That night, Malcolm appeared at her friend's door, his polished exterior fraying. His tie hung loose, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But when they met hers, they burned with intensity. "Come with me," he said, voice raw, no preamble. "Away from this. Headlines, whispers, all of it." Kemi crossed her arms, grounding herself against the pull of his desperation. "To what? Your penthouse? Your world where I'm just the cleaner who got too close?" His voice dropped, rough but earnest. "To a place where none of that defines us, where I can fight for you, if you'll let me." Her silence was a wall. She wanted to lean into the memory of their night together, when his vulnerability had matched hers, when his touch had felt like a promise. But the city's judgment roared louder, and inside she carried the truth. She was more than his scandal, more than a story to be fixed. "I don't need you to fight for me," she said, voice trembling but resolute. "I need to fight for myself." He stepped closer, shadows deepening across his face. "What if we fight together?" The question cracked something in her. She looked away to the cracked ceiling, to the rain tapping the window like a warning of storms yet to come. She didn't answer, but she didn't close the door. The next morning, a call came from an art supply store in Chelsea. They'd found her portfolio online, sketches she didn't recall submitting, and wanted her for an interview. Suspicion flickered. Had Malcolm pulled strings? But the chance was too real to dismiss. At the store, Judith, the silver-haired owner, flipped through her drawings with a nod. "You see what others miss," she said, her eyes sharp but warm. "That's rare." She offered Kemi a job as assistant manager, and relief flooded Kemi's chest. This was hers, earned by her talent, not borrowed from anyone's influence. Kemi threw herself into her new life. By day, she managed inventory, her hands steady among brushes and canvases. By evening, she volunteered at a community center, teaching kids in her neighborhood to draw. Their small hands clutched pencils, their laughter a balm to her wounds. She sketched with them, her lines bolder, her heart lighter. Each stroke was a reclamation, a reminder that she was more than the headlines. Malcolm, meanwhile, faced a reckoning. The board's pressure didn't relent. Distance and deny echoed in every meeting, but silence was no longer an option. He began redirecting his energy, quietly funding a foundation from his personal wealth. It would offer housing and educational grants to those his empire had overlooked, people like Kemi, whose lives were collateral in corporate games. He named it Horizon, a nod to the skyline they'd shared that night. When he invited Kemi to join its advisory board, she hesitated. The offer was generous, but it felt like another tether to his world. "I won't be your charity case," she told him, her voice firm. She stepped back from the project, choosing her own path over his vision of redemption. The decision was her darkest moment, a severance of the fragile thread between them. She felt the loss like a physical ache, but also a strange clarity. She wasn't running from him. She was running toward herself. Malcolm, too, reached a breaking point. The empire he'd built demanded his obedience, but he was done bending. In a quiet boardroom meeting, he announced his decision. He would step back from daily operations, passing the CEO role to his COO, Elena Vasquez, a steady hand who'd earned her place. He'd remain executive chairman, guiding strategy but freeing himself to live by his choices, not the board's. The turning point wasn't a headline cleared or a deal salvaged. It was a quiet resolve, born in the wreckage of scandal. For Malcolm, it was the realization that love wasn't about control, but about building something that outlasted storms. For Kemi, it was standing in the art store, surrounded by colors and possibilities, knowing she'd carved her own space. She walked home one evening, sketchbook in hand, the city's noise softer now. A child from her art class had drawn her a picture, a bright, uneven sun over a skyline. She tucked it into her book, a reminder that storms pass, and what remains can be rebuilt stronger. The invitation arrived like a quiet challenge. Catherine Blackwell, a woman who measured words with surgical precision, had asked Kemi to join her at a children's hospital benefit. The gala was not held in a ballroom dripping with chandeliers, but in the brightly lit recreation hall of the ward itself, its walls painted with cartoon animals and skies meant to soothe frightened patients. Kemi hesitated when she received the call, sensing the weight behind it. This wasn't only about charity, it was a test, and she knew it. When the day came, she walked through the hospital doors with a mix of unease and defiance. She wore a simple navy dress, nothing extravagant, paired with the dignity of someone who refused to perform for approval. Catherine was already there, her silver hair catching the light as she greeted donors, her presence commanding the room without effort. For a moment their eyes met, and Catherine's expression revealed little, only curiosity tempered by caution. The event unfolded with speeches, laughter, and the clinking of dishes as children mingled among benefactors. Kemi bent down to tie a little boy's loose shoelace, then stayed to listen as he described the dragon he wanted to draw on the wall if the nurses would allow it. She smiled, asking questions that made his face brighten, while Catherine watched from across the room, taking in every gesture. Later, Kemi helped carry art supplies to a table where a group of children sat waiting, rolling up her sleeves without hesitation, sketching alongside them while others stood back. It wasn't performance, it was instinct. When the night wound down, Catherine approached. The hall was quieter now, shadows lengthening as staff gathered trays and stacked chairs. Catherine carried a small box in her hands, not ostentatious, just polished wood with years etched into its grain. She offered it to Kemi without preamble. Inside lay a delicate scarf, hand-woven in muted blues and whites, edges frayed from decades of use. "This belonged to my mother," Catherine said, her voice softer than Kemi had ever heard. "She wore it to every volunteer shift she took at shelters, long before our name meant anything. It reminded her of who she served, not who she was." Kemi's throat tightened. She understood the meaning. This was no trinket of wealth, but a symbol of earned acceptance. She lifted the scarf gently, feeling its history, its weight. Catherine's gaze held hers with quiet resolve. "You do not defer unnecessarily. You see people. That is something this family has needed for a long time." The words carried no theatrics, yet they struck deeper than applause. Kemi bowed her head slightly, her voice low but steady. "Thank you. I will honor it." Catherine nodded once, and for the first time, her eyes softened with something like respect. Weeks later, Malcolm and Kemi signed the lease on a loft far from the glass towers of Midtown. It wasn't grand. Brick walls bared their history with cracks and scars. Wooden beams creaked underfoot, and sunlight spilled in through wide industrial windows. But for both of them, it was freedom. They painted the walls together, laughed when rollers splattered paint on their clothes, and filled the empty rooms with mismatched furniture chosen for comfort rather than prestige. For Malcolm, stepping away from the sterile perfection of his penthouse felt like shedding armor. For Kemi, it was building a space where her voice carried equal weight. She claimed the sunlit corner for her studio, setting up her easel beside jars of brushes and stacks of sketchbooks. The loft smelled of turpentine and fresh bread because she insisted on baking on Sunday mornings, and Malcolm insisted on learning. They discovered a rhythm that was less about dominance and more about coexistence, her laughter cutting through his brooding silences, his stability steadying her restless dreams. Soon the loft became more than a home. Kemi opened her doors to neighborhood children, many from families like the ones she had come from, too familiar with scarcity and silence. The first afternoon, only two came, shy and uncertain. By the second week, there were six, their voices rising like a chorus of possibility. They painted skies brighter than the city's gray, built worlds on paper that no storm could wash away. Among them was Zuri, a quiet girl with eyes too old for her age, who lingered after class to ask if she could borrow pencils. Kemi knelt beside her, pressing a set into her hands. "These are yours," she said. "Draw everything you dream." The way Zuri's face lit up was enough to confirm why the studio had to exist. Malcolm often stood in the doorway during these afternoons, watching her with the children, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled, expression transformed. He had once built walls from contracts and power plays, but here he saw something sturdier rising: connection, resilience, joy. He didn't speak often during those sessions, but when he did, his words carried weight. "You're giving them what no ledger ever could," he told her one evening as they cleaned brushes together. She smiled, rinsing the paint-stained water. "I'm just giving them what I wish someone had given me." One night after the children had left and silence draped the loft, Kemi unveiled a charcoal portrait she had hidden for weeks. It was Malcolm, but not as the world saw him. His jaw still sharp, his frame still commanding, yet his eyes held vulnerability, softened by truth. He stared at it for a long time, jaw tight, as if afraid to breathe. Finally he spoke, voice raw. "This is how you see me?" She stepped closer, touching the edge of the canvas. "This is who you are, not the empire, not the headlines, the man beneath it all, the man who let me in." His hand brushed hers, his throat thick. "Control built my walls." Her answer was quiet, but fierce. "Trust opened the door." The loft's final transformation came not with furniture or art, but with sound. Laughter filled its walls, the high, unrestrained laughter of children painting their dreams across canvases. Kemi stood beside her new easel, light pouring over her shoulders, her hands guiding young artists as they dared to believe in colors brighter than circumstance. Malcolm entered quietly, carrying the portrait she had given him, his expression unreadable yet softened by pride. He leaned it against the wall near her easel, not to display power, but to display truth. That being seen was the rarest gift. As brushes scraped against canvas and voices overlapped in joyous chaos, he looked at her, the woman who had shifted his axis. And in that moment, the world shrank to a single, undeniable fact. Love had not rescued them. It had redefined them. She met his gaze, steady, unflinching, and for once both knew no storm could undo what they had built. The invitation arrived like a quiet challenge, slipped into Kemi's mailbox with no fanfare. Catherine Blackwell, Malcolm's mother, had requested her presence at a children's hospital benefit. The note was brief, written in sharp, elegant script, but its weight was unmistakable. This was no casual gesture. Catherine, a woman who wielded words with the precision of a surgeon, was testing her. Kemi stood in her friend's cramped Brooklyn apartment, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. She sensed the stakes. This was about more than charity. It was about proving she belonged in a world that had already judged her. The event was held not in a glittering ballroom, but in the hospital's recreation hall, its walls painted with cartoon giraffes and clouds to comfort frightened children. Kemi arrived in a simple navy dress, its clean lines a quiet defiance against the expectations of grandeur. She carried herself with the dignity of someone who refused to perform for approval, her chin lifted, her steps measured. Catherine was already there, her silver hair catching the fluorescent light as she moved among donors, her presence commanding without effort. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and Catherine's expression held a guarded curiosity, her lips a thin line, revealing nothing. The evening unfolded with warmth despite the hospital's sterile air. Children darted between tables, their laughter mingling with the clink of plates and soft hum of conversation. Kemi knelt to tie a boy's loose shoelace, his small hands clutching a crayon as he described a dragon he dreamed of painting on the ward's wall. "It'd have red wings and breathe stars," he said, eyes wide. She smiled, asking what stars tasted like, and his face lit up as he spun a story of sugar and fire. From the corner of her eye, she caught Catherine watching, her gaze steady, taking in every gesture. Later, Kimmy joined a group of children at an art table, rolling up her sleeves to help them sketch. She guided their hands, coaxing bold lines from hesitant fingers, her own sketches blending with theirs. Bright, chaotic shapes that defied the hospital's gray reality. Donors and staff kept their distance, but Kemi didn't notice. This wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about the kids, their joy, and a language she spoke fluently. Catherine observed from afar, her posture still, her eyes narrowing slightly as if reassessing a puzzle. As the night drew to a close, the hall grew quieter, shadows stretching across the linoleum. Staff cleared trays, chairs scraped into stacks, and the last donors drifted out. Catherine approached, holding a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by time, unadorned but heavy with history. She offered it to Kemi without ceremony. "Open it," she said, her voice low but warm, a departure from her usual steel. Inside lay a hand-woven scarf, its blues and whites faded, its edges frayed from years of use. "This was my mother's," Catherine said, her gaze steady. "She wore it to every volunteer shift at shelters, long before our name carried weight. It kept her grounded, reminded her who she served, not who she was." Kemi's throat tightened as she lifted the scarf, its threads soft against her fingers, heavy with meaning. This wasn't a gift of wealth, but of legacy, an acknowledgement earned through actions, not pity. "You don't defer unnecessarily," Catherine continued, her voice softer now, almost confiding. "You see people, really see them. That's something this family has needed for a long time." The words landed like a quiet benediction, deeper than applause. Kemi met her gaze, her own voice steady despite the emotion rising in her chest. "Thank you. I'll honor it." Catherine nodded once, her eyes softening with a rare glint of respect, and turned away, leaving Kemi holding the scarf like a promise. Weeks later, Kemi and Malcolm signed the lease on a loft in a gritty corner of the city, far from the glass towers of Midtown. The space was raw, brick walls scarred with cracks, wooden beams creaking underfoot, wide industrial windows letting in unfiltered light. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs, a rebellion against the sterile perfection of Malcolm's old life. They painted the walls together, laughing when paint splattered their clothes, choosing mismatched furniture for comfort over status. For Malcolm, leaving his penthouse felt like shedding armor, each step lighter without the weight of expectation. For Kemi, it was a space where her voice carried as much weight as his, where she could build without proving herself. Kemi claimed the sunlit corner for her studio, setting up an easel beside jars of brushes and stacks of sketchbooks. The loft smelled of turpentine and fresh bread, a ritual born from Kemi's insistence on baking Sunday mornings and Malcolm's stubborn attempts to learn. They found a rhythm, her laughter cutting through his quiet intensity, his steadiness anchoring her restless dreams. The loft became a sanctuary, not just for them, but for something larger. Kemi opened her doors to neighborhood children, many from families like hers, shaped by scarcity and resilience. The first afternoon, 2 kids showed up, shy and clutching worn backpacks. By the second week, 6 crowded the loft, their voices a chorus of possibility. They painted skies brighter than the city's gray, dragons and stars spilling across paper, worlds no storm could erase. Among them was Zuri, a quiet girl with eyes too old for her 10 years, who lingered after class to sketch in silence. One evening, she asked if she could borrow pencils. Kemi knelt beside her, pressing a set into her hands. "These are yours," she said. "Draw everything you dream." Zuri's smile, small but radiant, was a victory Kemi carried in her chest. Malcolm often watched from the doorway, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, his expression softened by something new. Pride not in ownership, but in witnessing creation. He'd built empires with contracts and control, but here he saw something stronger. Connection, resilience, joy. You're giving them what no ledger could, he told her one night as they cleaned brushes, the sink swirling with paint-streaked water. She smiled, rinsing a brush. I'm giving them what I wish someone had given me. One evening, after the children left, Kemi unveiled a charcoal portrait she'd kept hidden. It was Malcolm, not the CEO in tailored suits, but the man beneath, his jaw sharp, his frame commanding, yet his eyes raw with vulnerability. He stared at it, breath catching, jaw tight as if afraid to speak. This is how you see me? He asked, a voice rough. She stepped closer, touching the canvas's edge. This is who you are, not the empire, not the headlines. The man who let me in. His hand brushed hers, his throat thick with emotion. Control built my walls, he said, the words heavy with truth. Her response was quiet, fierce. Trust opened the door. The loft's final transformation wasn't in its walls or furniture, but in its sound. Laughter, bright and unrestrained, as children filled the space with their art. Kemi stood by her new easel, sunlight spilling over her shoulders, guiding young hands as they painted dreams bolder than their circumstances. Malcolm entered quietly, carrying the portrait she'd drawn, his expression unreadable, yet warm with pride. He leaned it against the wall near her easel, not as a trophy, but as a testament to being seen. Brushes scraped canvas, voices overlapped in joyful chaos, and he looked at her, the woman who'd shifted his world. In that moment, the city's noise faded, leaving one truth. Love hadn't rescued them, it had redefined them. They met each other's gaze, steady and unflinching, knowing no storm could unravel what they'd built. And that brings us to the end of Kemi and Malcolm's journey, a story of love, resilience, and the courage to break through the walls that divide us. What did this story stir in you? Do you believe love can truly transcend class, power, and circumstance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one, and tell us where in the world you're listening from. Thank you for spending your time with us today, and until next time, remember, the most powerful stories are not the perfect ones, but the ones that remind us what it means to be human.